it's a good template and one that we should utilize. So that's what we did here. We made a couple of minor tweaks to customize it for purposes of the One Ohio board. One was that we did some research around the role of public officials on the board. Ultimately, we decided that we didn't need to make changes here in the policy. I'll let Marty explain this, but we believe that Ohio ethics laws control, and there's no need to really put anything in the conflict policy. Do you want to?
Yeah, I spent a good amount of time looking at the two side by side because we have so many public officials engaged here. But I think if you comply with this policy with respect to the work of the board, I think you'll be fine. It really tracks the conflict of interest. If there would arise an occasion, which I seriously doubt will happen, where you would have an interest in a public contract, then of course that's a whole different question. But because you're sitting on this board as a director and the Ethics Commission has said this does not, being on this board does not make you a public official for ethics purposes. You're already a public official, But the work you're doing on this board is essentially as a private citizen. So this ethics policy, this conflict policy should be just fine. And it basically tracks what the Ethics Commission advice is on situations that are conflicts of interest under Ohio ethics law. So, but if anybody, I'll extend this to all of you. If anybody has any questions about this policy or about the Ohio ethics law with respect to your participation in One Ohio, just feel free to give me a call. Because I think, that's the easiest way to resolve whatever individual questions or conflicts you have. Fair?
One item I might call out in particular is Article 2, Section 2D is one that we added as just to customize this. So if the individual is an elected officer of a governmental entity with which the foundation has or may have a transaction or arrangement, then that may constitute a conflict of interest, and you'll run through this process. So, I think we're going to look at this policy as it relates to the grant making policy as well. We'll cross-reference the two, and we'll make sure that you guys are very clear on the process for either running the conflict check and running through this process as it relates to grant making, or where it's necessary or not.
And I might just add, if you've served on other nonprofit boards who have policies, it probably looks a lot like this one should. And the process is basically, if there's a conflict, you get to present, if that's appropriate, offer your opinions and exit the room while the board then deliberates on the issue and takes a roll call. So it's a pretty standard process, tax exempt.
Do I? Yes.
Where will these issues be addressed with regard to the expert?
I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
Where will these issues with potential conflicts be addressed with regard to the expert panel?
So the expert panel policy will refer back to the conflict of interest.
So the same process will.
Did subject the, see here. We specifically included committees, directors, officers, members of the committee with board delegated powers. We could expressly include the expert panel within the definition of an interested person, but it is technically a committee that has board delegated powers. So I don't think you need to.
We had talked about that. I mean, I don't think there's any harm in including them specifically if you're more comfortable with stating that. And sense of truth.
Anybody have an opinion one way or the other?
say when I read that, I didn't think it applied to the next.
So maybe having the clarification.
So you want to move that, Josh?
Yeah, but we moved to add to expert management.
Second the motion,
Who's the second?
Jeff Dix.
Thank you. Is there a second? Yeah.
Any discussion on that?
I couldn't quite hear the motion.
Just to add to the definition of an interested person under Article 2, Section 1, the expert panel, members of the expert panel. So that they are expressly included into the conflict policy.
So we have a motion to amend. Is there anything else for discussion before we move forward with that vote?
On section E, just the language, the aren't insubstantial,
I'm sorry, which section are you in?
2E. We change that to more than de minimis, possibly. And then on financial interest isn't, can we just change that to is not?
What section is that?
It's paragraph E of
Oh, got it.
Article 2, section
2E.
Yeah, certainly we can correct it to is not. If you're more comfortable with de minimis, both of these terms.
Yeah, it's nebulous. It's-
Something for the board to decide on a case-by-case basis. You know, if you're talking about $1 million, $10 is de minimis, right?
Right.
That kind of thing. There, I guess in terms of exempt speak, there is this whole thing of what is de minimis with respect to if you get a gratuity in exchange for a donation, got some kind of context there. But it's always going to be, you know, in respect to whatever the total is, so. It's, we can't, you know, putting a specific amount in doesn't seem to me to be a good idea.
No, I understand that, but just and again, this is the English teacher or something coming out, maybe aren't insubstantial strikes me as, you know, less than artful drafting. And we use de minimis in the code of judicial conduct, and I'm sure it's another conduct codes.
I think it's in.
Yeah, we're not gonna-
I think it is in that.
Well, we can certainly change that to, that are de minimis in nature. I don't know that de minimis is the ending of a sentence. Where's the grammar?
More than de minimis.
Is that are more than de minimis? I'm okay with that language, if everybody else is.
Is that a motion?
We have a motion on the floor for an amendment, so
Yeah, I thought you were asking for additional matters
Well-
in the amendment.
we can amend the motion to include the two words that need to be changed.
Is that okay with?
Is that okay with you, Josh, or do you want two separate motions?
Amend that motion will include the changes by judgment I have.
And I'll amend my second.
Thank you. Okay, so any opposed to the amendment? Any abstentions? The amendment passes. I now need a motion to accept the conflict of interest policy as amended.
So moved, Jeff Fix.
Second.
Any further discussion? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, it is my understanding we do not have a need for executive session unless Marty or Holly need to. So there'll be no executive session today. So now we're up for items of discussion. The first one is the diversity and inclusion policy. I'm going to turn that over to Holly.
Sure. So the board expressed an interest in adopting a diversity and inclusion policy. I took your feedback from discussions prior, as well as many conversations with members of the community in this space. And this is a draft, your discussion and consideration. There's the provision in there, so looking for it. Oh, yeah, here. So there's under, and I can go back and number this, so it might be easier for reference, but under the heading diversity and inclusion goals, this is something for you to consider. There's a number of items here that we felt were good business practice, something for you to consider. You can add more, you can discuss and subtract them. That's the pleasure of the board. So I'm happy to answer any questions around how we arrived at this, the provisions of this policy and how it may be improved.
Christopher Smitherman, first, thank you for working on this. And I appreciate you submitting it as a draft. It gives board members an opportunity to weigh in on it and discuss it. One of the questions I had is how do we measure success? Anything that I do, probably all the people listening, is we measure things. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the best way to measure how we're performing in this area and how to include it in the policy.
So under diversity and inclusion goals, the last bullet, we did add a recommendation that you, with some frequency, whether it's annually or otherwise, conduct a roundtable or listening session. You could do a survey. There's lots of ways you could accomplish this to evaluate the efforts in this space. So that's one measure of measuring, or a metric for measuring. You can do work, for the workplace provisions, you can do workplace surveys. That's a standard business practice that we've seen. There's a bullet point here that we ask our partners to share in these values and demonstrate that they're doing that. That could be, an administrative function of checking to make sure, are we actually adding this as a step to our processes? The annually inviting an expert in DEI, that speaks for itself. If you want to add in metrics around that, I think you're welcome to. The member of the expert panel, I think that again speaks for itself. And then I'm sure our communications team, I think you would be helpful in determining, how are we reaching these marginalized communities? So I would recommend a partnership with them to determine a metric there as well.
Yes.
Chris, do you have something in mind? Is there something that we've missed that could be helpful?
That was directed to me?
Yes. Do you have something in mind? Was there something that was missing that perhaps would be helpful for this?
Yeah, I think one, having the expert talk to us, because one, I'm not an expert, but having someone talk to our board prior to us approving this is important, so that we understand what all the options are of what we can do or what we can have in the policy that's legal, that keeps us on a pathway, making sure that inclusion is a part of it. And I didn't see anything in the policy regarding procurement. that word being used, of saying, hey, as we are extending grants, um, trying to make sure that everyone who has been impacted by this crisis receives support. How do we measure that? So in procurement, and I'm talking specifically about who's managing the money, what lawyers we're using, um, what accountants we're using. So also the professionals that are connected to all of us. So kind of the bigger picture.
So
Those are
what- Sorry.
those are just some general thoughts about it. But I think most importantly, we should have the expert that it speaks about to come in annually to talk to us. We should have someone come in and kind of lay this out for us so we stay within the law, but also we're developing a policy that's very, very much within what inclusion policies look like across the state of Ohio.
So it is included in Foundation Commitment to Diversity and Inclusion. You'll see we included specifically vendor contracting, grant making, beneficiaries served. I think if the board wanted to, you could add a specific goal under diversity and inclusion goals around this piece. So making sure that in all RFPs or procurement opportunities that you're soliciting diverse candidates. That's the same with employment as well. That's an option. Or you don't have to, the goals are there, you can put them in writing, or you can take a year to feel how, this is going and then reassess once you have an expert come in.
I like Chris's idea of bringing somebody in. Maybe we could do that in December.
I was just thinking that we would look at having somebody brought in for the December meeting.
And of course, we just want to, I don't know if putting specific goals in the policy is the right direction. An inclusion expert might say, stay 30,000 feet in the air. Don't, stay away from being specific. But whatever we can do, I think the piece about accountability that it talks about annually looking at it is important. But having someone come, I think, and talk to us, like providing this document to the expert and then having the expert come in and respond to it, I think would be very helpful for all of us.
Thank you, Chris. Dr. Roizen?
Um,
You're muted again.
that delay through December won't delay the 501c3 submission, will it? And if it will, can we have a placekeeper that we accept pending a expert coming in? Because I think Chris's idea is an excellent one, but I don't want to delay the 501c3 because that'll delay the grant making and everything else.
It will not delay that process.
Great.
It's not this policy specifically is not a requirement of the 10th.
Or behaving in this way is a requirement of being a tax exempt organization. We will, of course, advise the IRS that we've adopted such a policy because we need all the stuff on our side that we can get for all the reasons we've discussed.
I just have a question. And I know that under the Foundation Commitment to Diversity and Inclusion, we reference grant making, but since that's our primary mission, do we also need to build that as one of our goals? I can go either way, but to me, that's our primary mission, and we don't list diversity in our grant making as a goal. But I'm happy either way.
But I think it's up to the board to decide, you could, well, actually, there's the 1969. There is a code section where you can't make grants specifically there's one provision, I'm gonna look up, there's like one provision that we've advised clients on in the past where you can't make grants specifically to, on a racial basis. So I need to check on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think your question really is how do we build into the grant making process?
Yes,
more
I know,
diversity?
Yes.
And
Yeah,
I,
but,
go ahead.
So to me, the question is, do we put something specific in here, and this is again up to the board, or is this a charge of the grant making committee? Because that grant making policy is yet to be developed. And I think to me, that's where it really needs to be to carry out what's in here. But if you want to call out grant making in this policy, I think the other piece of that, if I might, is how do we impart to the regions? And certainly the grant making policy is one, that's your hammer in a sense. To the regions to be inclusive, both inclusive the table at the region and what are they looking at? How are they developing the proposals? How are they vetting the proposals? All of that. I mean, this policy needs to just insinuate itself all the way through the system. And how to do that, the expert needs to talk to us about. Does that?
I'm satisfied with that.
Yeah, I do believe that it's the appropriate place is the grant making policy.
I'm fine.
And you'll see as all these policies are developed, they will be referencing back to specific policies, conflict of interest, the diversity and inclusion policy, so that we're not rewriting the entire policy into policies, but it'll be referencing back to include.
If I could, just a few thoughts. I guess one thing I noticed is there is a typo. In the second bullet point of diversity inclusion goals, I think it's supposed to say an expert in, it says expert.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
But regarding some of the quotas, I guess if we were to consider going down that route, my concern is that we could potentially put ourselves in a position that would be difficult if we went down all the way down to the regional level. We have a lot of regions on this group, a lot of regions that are in relatively, I'll be frank, areas that don't have that much diversity from a racial perspective or anything, or anything of that nature across the board, any of one of the classes that's identified here. And so if we put quotas all the way down to that level, it may be very difficult in some of these regions to satisfy those quotas. I guess the other question I have is, this is a question for the drafters. The third to last bullet point in the diversity and inclusion goals, it says, we will ask that our partners share in our values and demonstrate to us how they uphold their own commitment to diversity and inclusion. What does that mean?
Usually you see that as part of an RFP question, share with us what your own diversity and inclusion policy is, share with us the initiatives. So it's just simply adding it to an application or an RFP. It's up, I think we left it intentionally broad so that you weren't hamstrung to ask it in a particular way, but just that you are keeping it top of mind. Again, this was, the policy was not necessarily the procedures. This is just sort of the high level philosophy as to how you want the staff, the employees, the board to conduct themselves as to diversity and inclusion. So I've seen it in a number of different forms, and we could make specific recommendations.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a problem if there were part of the grant making process that said, how is this going to impact, or how is this going to affect in a positive way members of these classes that we've outlined? But saying, how do you conduct your business or your operations? Again, some of these regions, if you're in a county, and there are counties across the state that are 97% white people, and I mean, they may have a 100% Caucasian workforce. And if we say, hey, you got to show to us how you're diverse in your workforce or whatever it may be, they're not going to be able to satisfy that necessarily. And so I think we have to be very careful about getting too much into the weeds of this and generally just make it something that we would, rather than say, you have to conduct yourself this way, we can make it a factor in our consideration instead, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
The one thing I would say is that I wouldn't advise necessarily calling out racial diversity. We define it broadly, and so there's many ways that a region could make sure that they're achieving their diversity and inclusion goals. You know, ethnicity, age, right, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression. There's veteran status. There's lots of other ways. So let's just keep. I would not advise that you specifically ask a question on, you know, the specifics within those characteristics. In fact,
Christopher Smitherman. Now, I would agree. For me, the word quota almost is a trigger. I don't know why. I don't think we're here talking about quotas. But again, the expert that we bring in will help educate the board on, what is the correct language and how we can do all of these things that we all value legally. And I was going to highlight that race is only one part of this discussion. I thought the drafters of this did a good job of talking about sexual orientation, talking about veterans. Were two of the classes. Sex was another class. Religion, disability. So it's not just about race. And I think the expert that we bring in hopefully will help clarify that. I think in our last discussion about this, we talked about veterans in particular. So there are a lot of ways that different regions can meet the expectations of diversity, but keep it top of mind because there's so many communities that have been impacted by this crisis. We don't want to miss them. And we want to make sure that we're providing the financial support for all of the citizens in Ohio is the goal. So I'm looking forward to the expert coming in to provide some more direction about what we can or can't do. But I want to emphasize, to me, this is not about a quota. I don't think we should ever have any target numbers here. I don't think that's needed. But the expert might have a different opinion about that.
Yeah, and to clarify, I understand it's not just about race. That was just the example I was providing. And I understand it's much more broad than that. There are different ways you can do it. My concern still remains, though, that and I'm not saying this does that, so I would be interested again in hearing the experts well, is that if we get too prescriptive, is that we kind of paint ourselves into a corner in different areas that are going to be very difficult to satisfy this prong in our grant evaluation process potentially. That's my only concern.
Any other discussion?
so I can take some of this and make some amendments, and then we can take it into an expert.
Yep, we're gonna reach out. I will look to do that, and get somebody in for a December meeting. In the meantime, Holly can start making some of the suggested changes for that. Thank you. All right, operations report, Jim.
Good afternoon. In the packet is a one pager that kind of summarizes what we've been up to. Talked with Larry and Catherine. Stuff is like instead of dominoes that have to go off, except they're going off in all different orders. And so we're just trying to pull together what all those dominoes will be and align them up. So Catherine talked about the office space of the Polaris Cohatch, right there off 71, 270. We have some meeting space, we have a two-person office, and a large room. Probably look in this one.
They're neat.
Yes,
Heat is included.
heat is included.
We asked to heat down, because it's too hot.
There could be a surcharge.
Okay.
We have a locked mailbox, and so that stuff will be secure. Bought some computers, got some few desks, a couple chairs, and we started working out of there. Banking, so we've been successfully making payments slowly as we've worked through Huntington's processes, so letting them attend training, had meetings with them. Most of the payments that we've made to date have been ACH, electronic payments, which require 2 levels of approval. We also have a debit card for use of computers and furniture from IKEA and those kind of things, where we need a point of sale card. To date, we've paid in the last 3.5 weeks, 229,000. Of the 25,000 that you guys approved last month, we only spent about 8,000 of that. The rest of it was Robert Half and Benish, and the big one was insurance. Insurance, so that's how much money we have that we expend. On the budget, hopefully in December, we'll have a lot more information about what the budget may be for next year, and start getting that out there. We're working with the AG's office. I've had multiple meetings with finance officer there, and what controls we would have and how things might work, and we're going to continue those discussions over the next couple of months. On Monday, we received a lengthy email from the AG's office, Jonathan, about estimated revenue. And so the estimated revenues are a lot more complicated than they may appear. So I've sent back some follow-up questions, and hopefully we will get more definition on the timing, when exactly would these things happen, and what are the probabilities of certain scenarios happen. On the accounting front, one of the things that I've asked the executive committee here, I've created an RFP for the CPA auditor. I mean, that's great at this point. We've been collecting information. Whenever, in my previous work, whenever we got a new grant or a new funding or a budget bill was passed from the General Assembly, we go through and we build what we call financial requirements. It's like, what are all the requirements that are buried in these documents, right? So we've done that with the MOUs and the regulations, and as your policies come out, those will influence this. This thing will keep changing as we learn about what the requirements are. What requirements you guys set, and maybe some requirements that the CPA says, well, we're nonprofit, we shouldn't do this. Well, one of those is the decision on whether we are accrual or cash basis. That is a major decision, right? All of you that work for governments you're on a cash basis or modified accrual, right? Pretty easy. When revenue comes in, you recognize the revenue. In your accrual system, revenue could be recognized in a different period, right? So if we choose accrual, how might the potential revenue be recognized? Will it need to be recognized this tax year? But we haven't received it. So that's what we need to see. And to help with the tax belongings and financial information, for the exemption application. So we like to see if we can get that. I've started putting together an operating manual with like draft procedures. I list them in here as policies, rules, procedures. Once you guys establish policies, then we'll put together operating rules to comply with your policy, right? So as your policies, I'm familiar. The audit finance, certainly the grant committee is going to have a lot to say on what kind of policies and procedures we put in place. So, started drafting those up, just kind of seeing what those might, you know, those might be. Okay, is there any questions?
Always exciting to talk about cash versus
Yep.
total-based.
Yeah, yes.
Hope we didn't lose everybody in that
Well,
conversation.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jim. You've gotten quite a bit done since you joined the team, so we appreciate the work that you've done so far. Okay, on to committee reports, audit and finance. Larry?
Thank you. And thanks, Jim, for the report. And as Jim mentioned, we are in the process of putting together an RFP for an accounting firm for the accounting work, tax return and such. But we also will be looking in the near future for an audit firm. It may or may not be the same firm, depending on the size of the company. But to engage with the tax firm, the accounting firm, until we get the budget put together, which we hope to bring to the table in December, get approval, we'll continue to come back to the board for permission to spend money. We'd like to get a motion to approve $35,000 to find a tax firm. And we will probably come back in December asking for money for an audit firm once we put that together as well. So I'll make a motion if you'd like to second that.
Second motion.
So 35,000 will go towards what exactly?
For a tax firm for advice and, accrual versus cash,
To pay the tax.
not to pay the taxes, to establish.
The tax firm.
Right, right, up to,
Gotcha, thank you. And that goes through the end of the year.
right.
We'll have them look at the 1023 as well.
Yeah.
And there will be a 990, this won't be due till next May, 15th of May, but there will be a 990 due for this year. Even though we haven't got the 1023 filed yet, we're hopeful to get it done by the end of the year. Wait for this revenue question to be answered. So there'll be ongoing work for them to care for that.
Right, so I'm assuming then that we would sign a contract with a tax or CPA and then the audit firm, right? That would be, we would hope long lasting.
Right, so the 35 should take us through the end of the year, it should be more than plenty. I don't know what the monthly fee would be, but, and again, a lot of that might be front heavy because they're gonna be providing a lot of advice. And once we get it established, cash versus accrual, we don't even have a software system, we haven't even bought QuickBooks yet, because we don't know what the grant looks like, grant making looks like. And there could be programs on the tax or the accounting firm's advice that we should purchase rather than, or maybe even outsource it. We may come back and say, maybe we should outsource our financials completely. So, we're looking to their expertise for advice.
And any contract we would sign with a CPA firm or audit firm would go to the executive committee or come through the full board? How's that?
We're asking for permission. It would go through the executive. What I'm asking for is a motion to allow us to make that decision, spend up to 35,000 to not only engage, but also sign a contract. Because frankly, by December, we're going to be so late into
Yeah,
getting.
no, I get it. Just trying to clarify, thank you.
Right now, the only cash we have on hand is the cash from the Attorney General,
Correct.
and that is, was $1 million?
It was.
And if this motion passed, where are we, what are we down to?
In the 780. 780.
Yeah.
Any other discussion?
I would just like a, accounting of our finances at some point.
It will be at
I
the
think-
December.
I think we're spending a lot of money and we approve stuff here and there and we need to stay on track of what we're spending and what we're spending it on.
There'll be a statement.
Every time we're spending a lot of money on things and I'm not an expert in this room, but 35,000 seems like a lot to get something nice.
We certainly. And once we get a budget, we won't be going back every time. The budget will be approved. But right now, we're doing it on an Excel spreadsheet, so it's just not.
Any other discussion?
Would we be using something like the simple QuickBooks for our?
Well, perhaps, but again, we want to look to the advice of the expertise, the expert, because perhaps there's a software system that can also accommodate grant making. And I'm not so sure QuickBooks can do that.
If I might, hopefully, if an accounting firm is chosen that has the nonprofit expertise, they can advise the board on not just the business software that we need, which will be well beyond QuickBooks, but something that if it doesn't itself handle the grants, will be compatible with grant making software. Because given the size of the grant you're going to be making and the number of grants and what you're going to need, keep track of it on something on an Excel spreadsheet for sure. So hopefully we'll have a company that can advise on what the best products are for doing that, and it will be compatible with financial software, so it doesn't just drive Jim and whoever else you get fired crazy, as it certainly can.
You know, the Department of Development is transitioning to using all Salesforce-based products. That seems to work well for making most grants, both from an application standpoint and
And maybe we have two software systems that
one for operations, one for grant.
perhaps, that maybe they can integrate. We don't know.
And I must add, we'll have to audit the grants from a fiscally due diligence point of view for the foundation. So you will need to have probably a second, a more complex software system to be able to do that.
Salesforce, I believe, allows you to do that.
Any other discussion?
I just want to clarify too, so this 35,000 is just for advice. It's not for purchasing the product or the software or any of that.
Well, we've come under budget on each of our requests each time. I would not expect it to cost quite 35,000. But we don't know because we haven't shopped it yet. So we're looking for advice on how the best way to set up the organization. And again, this is something that's going to last 18 years. You know, the length of the foundation, we'll make sure we do it correctly.
So Larry, yes, so in the RFP that put together, it would include tax advice, right? Making sure we get the proper accounting methodology set up. It would include helping us complete and fill out the 123 application, right? The benefits that we go, because it asks for detailed financials. And it asks for the accounting method in those financials, so. And it would also include filing any taxes, state, federal, 990s for this year.
So to answer your question, it's not just for advice. There's some other items that would be included in that as well. Any other questions or discussion? Any opposed to the motion? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. The Grant Oversight Committee had to cancel their meeting due to conflicts at that time, so we are trying to get them rescheduled. We will be reaching back out. Tom was unable to be here today, so the meeting was canceled, and we will be looking to reschedule that meeting. Judge Mattia, I know that you were interested in serving, so we'll be adding you to the committee. And then we will getting your information out to you, Tom, so that,
I did get notice of the Tuesday meeting, but
beautiful, you're just not on the list yet, okay. Well, we'll make sure that you get on that list. Okay, search committee update. Larry?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So we are in the process of interviewing the search firms. We received the RFPs back. We have eliminated one of the search firms. We're interviewing 3. It is something to note. It is pretty clear. It looks like it could take 6 or 8 months to find the right person and up to, which was, I was hopeful we could do that a lot sooner than later, which could put us into June. And if that is the case, we may want to discuss at some point an interim director. I don't know. That's up to the board, the pleasure of the board. So we hope to continue the interviews and make a selection. Again, given the amount of time that it could take to find the right person, you know, we would like the authority to move forward with the executive committee, the authority to move forward with one of the firms. Because we simply don't want to wait until December to do that. It would just kick it down another month. And of course, we have the cost of the firm, which if we bring the person in and they're outside of the state, our preference is to bring somebody in the state and, you know, obviously, but we also recognize that we want to get the best individual, not necessarily have to be an Ohio resident. If we have to bring somebody in, it would be at our cost. So there could be some travel expenses and other expenses. So we would request about $135,000 for the search firm, which is all in for the entire search process. Some of the firms are offering anywhere from 1 year guarantee. One firm is offering 2, which is unprecedented in the industry. So meaning if the individual does not work out during the time period, it would do a free replacement. And there is quite a bit of follow-up on all the firms that we've discussed with. And we do have one more that we're going to be talking to. So.
Larry, where are the firms located?
One, this was intentional. 3 of them were from Ohio, and one was from outside the state in Chicago. That way we were trying to get geographic diversity. And I'll allow the committee members to speak too, but you know, we were really impressed with the interviews that we had. I think they were just spot on, top notch, very, very professional, very similar searches in the past. So we're excited to.
Here in Columbus, or were they from?
Let's see,
Just curious.
they were throughout the state, I think. The 3 Cs each had one. I may be wrong about Cincinnati, and then Chicago, so 4 Cs.
And do they all have extensive nonprofit foundation
They do.
expertise?
They do. So I make a motion.
I'd like to hold on that motion because we do believe we have passed up to 150 for the search firm
Okay,
in a prior meeting. So I just want to make sure before.
so I managed.
That's, I would follow as well.
Oh, we've already done it. We don't even need to mention.
I don't remember. But Leah's looking and
Yeah.
sent me the minutes, so.
Yeah.
You probably know.
I have a motion on the floor, so
Oh,
I
you
can't
do?
really move on.
You could table.
I will go.
You're gonna withdraw the motion? We will come back to that. It's time, Holly and Murray, for your update.
Okay. Just 2 things, and it won't take long. I'll start with the 1023 application. The sort of last pieces of this are getting into place. You passed a conflict, excuse me, a conflict of interest policy today, which is something we have to show the IRS. The next big piece is the budget, and it is the budget massaged in the way the IRS wants to see it. same totals, different categories, is how that works. But we have to know what the revenue estimate is for the current year and 2 successive years. And while the IRS, as well as expenses, estimated expenses, while the IRS does not come back and say, well, you didn't spend $30 on pencils and, but they would notice if we said, we have $1 million in revenue for 2022, and in fact, we end up with $43 million for 2022. It would be kind of obvious when the 990 got filed. Also, we need to know what the expectation is for the next 2 years. So that's why we've been working on the Attorney General's office to give us that information and trying to make it clear that we won't be out of their hair in terms of getting our piece of this work done until they give us that information. But otherwise, working, continuing to refine the narrative that we will submit with this. We will need the board to approve the application. So once we have it, most of it will be a lot of tax deed language, but the actual application form, we can send out directly to the board, whatever the pleasure of the officers are, and then hopefully have it, on the December meeting for approval, but that all is pretty contingent upon what the AG tells us, and I'll assume they can tell us that. So those are what we need to have in place for to get it. And the grant making policy, or at least some general explanation of how the grant making is going to work. We need to include that because there are questions about, do you intend to make grants? If so, to whom, etc. I am not as concerned about having that policy in final form, although it would be great because you all need to get it in final form and get it out there. But we need to show the IRS as much as we can about how this thing looks like a grant-making foundation. So the more we can tell them about the grant making, about the policy, about how it's going to work, about what the application is going to look like, the better position we'll be in to overcome some of the obstacles we previously discussed with the IRS. So we're hopeful that we can actually have a final policy, but if what we have is a general outline, we don't want to delay the filing of the application any longer than, absolutely necessary. So that's where we are with 1023. The other piece of information to share with you is just to remind you all, we got a reply brief from Mr. Greiner on the open meetings case. We filed a response to that and shared that obviously with the executive committee. Anyone else who wants to see it, we're happy to send it. If you have insomnia, you can use this to overcome it. But we have oral arguments in Franklin County Common Pleas Court on the 27th of October. It's a courtroom, it's open. If you want to come watch, you're welcome to come. We're still discussing, we certainly would like to have at least one officer of the corporation there. I think Larry's planning to attend. It's the 27th of October.
1:30.
At 1:30 in the Common Pleas Court. So Josh has offered to attend. So we'd have a director there. If an officer can attend, that would be a good thing. You all want to attend, it's, certainly up to you. I don't know that it's the best expense of your time, but you're certainly welcome. On the Supreme Court, Holly just talked with Martin Tucker, and you want to go through the calendar on the public records case?
Yeah, so we essentially don't have an order yet. There's 3 ways that it could go. They could dismiss, which we didn't file a motion to dismiss, so that's not on the table. They could deny the writ, that's unlikely, or they could issue an alternative writ. So that sort of the process for that will be there's a presentation of evidence likely according to stipulations. So we're already working with opposing counsel on that for the Franklin County case, so likely to do the same there. We're likely to see an order in early November is the guidance that we've been given from the Supreme Court clerk, and I can pull up, this was just a total estimation. But let me see.
Just a refresher, the Supreme Court case is the public records case, and it's trailing behind the open meetings case. Open meetings, cases are filed in police court.
So usually, an order will go out within 2 to 3 months from filing, so that will put us in November. It could come any day, but that's, the expectation is early November. That means we'll be briefing it kind of around the holidays. So, we'll keep you updated as soon as we do have a timeline for that. We don't expect there'll be oral arguments, but we haven't really had the strategic conversation around whether that's something that we would request. We'll do that when we see more information.
Since these things aren't done in a vacuum, the Supreme Court may well be looking at the open meetings case and decide they aren't going to do anything until they see the outcome of that case, which is, the judge did initially say he was going to rule from the bench. Said that at the initial status conference. Whether or not he will do that, since there have been various briefs filed and arguments made, we don't know. But he might well rule from the bench on the 27th. It's kind of a crapshoot at this point in terms of what he's going to do. Official term crapshoot. Or is in the room a smile? Does anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you.
Rob the hook here.
So we are still looking for the information. So we will look to see that in December regarding the search firm. So is there anything else to be discussed?
I do have one item, back to a previous comment. I think would be helpful for me, especially to take back to the region. I know we had a couple of motions we approved the last few months with financial motions that were up to X amount of dollars, almost every single one of them. So I think it would be important in December to maybe get a little financial statement to see maybe what was approved up to, and if action was taken, what was the actual amount spent. I think that would really help.
And then a timeline of where we think we will be when we get the money, when we get the executive director, when we're in a position to request proposals for grants, and when we might be distributing the money. Just a bigger picture stuff for those of us to take back to our respective regions.
So at this time, we don't have a timeline in place because you cannot put out grants until you have an executive director and staff to be overseeing the operations of the foundation. So that's really reliant on the search committee and how quickly they find the right candidate. And we get that candidate in place and they get their staff on board. So we don't have dollars. So we don't have the settlement dollars, nor do we have a time frame as to when those settlement dollars will be released.
Still no time frame.
Still no time frame.
And then a development of a philosophy on grant making. Is that going to be with the grant making committee? Are we going to have a board retreat possibly? Bigger picture things to think about again. To be determined.
So when you talk about a board retreat for,
I mean, everybody brings their own collective experience here. And I'm sure we're all very interested in, and have our own ideas of, what might benefit the state in the greatest fashion. It would be helpful to, use our collective experience to spitball, you know, a general direction, as to, you know, how much, I'm not aware of how much we might be able to give away each year.
So that is determined by the MOU, is the percentage. The board will set the amount that will be going out as a whole. So then there's a percentage per region that's already allocated in the MOU of those dollars. It is all going to be dependent on our payments in the settlement and what they look like. So we've been estimating that we were going to get approximately $45 million this year. And that would include 2 payments from the settlement and then potentially 2 payments from the J&J.
And that's for this year.
That was
2022.
for this year. But we are here now, mid-October. We still don't have a time frame, which is why the Attorney General was gracious to give us $1 million so that we could actually start getting things done and putting operations into place, getting the insurance, getting equipment, hiring a board secretary, hiring a CFO. So those things getting in place, but we still do not have a time frame as to when the dollars are going to come down to us. So I can't put a timeline together for the board until we know when those dollars are going to be released.
And just so I understand, you know, there's a formula for how much the regions get, and then there's discretionary money that the directors, the foundation will allocate to the grant making process. Am I correct in that understanding?
So part of the settlement, the majority of the settlement is to go back to the communities. So there'll be, and for statewide, so there'll be an allocation that this board will have to determine how much of that payment is going to go to the regions and to statewide projects, to the statewide grant making process. So there's going to be 2 avenues that are going to have to be looked at.
So if I might, the first decision the board has to make with respect to every payment that comes in is how much is going to be allocated generally to the regions. Once that decision is made, within that decision, then each region gets that percentage that's delineated in the MOU. But there is that first decision about what goes to the regions. Then it's not really a decision about how much of that pie goes to each region, and then it's a process of, vetting that.
Each region will conceivably get the same amount.
No, there's a,
Based on.
it's in the MOU.
I know there was this, like, each municipality is getting like 0.06, 7%. That's what I'm confused
No,
about.
so that is different. So you have 3 pots, 3 percentages of the settlement. You have 15%, which is remaining with the state. You have 55% of the settlement that is coming to the foundation.
Right.
To distribute to statewide programs and regional programs. Then you have 30% of the settlement that has gone out to local government and municipalities. So when you see that
That's the
0.0097,
30%.
But it's not just based on those percentages, it's based on your population and what your severity was for your community.
so those
overdose crisis.
percentages
Yeah.
have already been set. So
I'll have to dig back in.
Yeah,
and read
they've been set, but everybody's percentage is different.
So like Ashtabula County's payment, our first payment was $64,339.81. It's what my county received.
Yeah, good luck with that.
But the percentages for the distribution to the regions which will be done through grants coming up and being approved. But those percentages are an attachment to the MOU, and they are fixed. It's just what isn't fixed is what's the total pie for that.
And it's not just statewide programs and regional shares, it's also investments, there's certain other operations, right? So there's other allocations. Should be considered.
This is Denise Dreehouse. Can you send that language related to the foundation percentage back out so that we have a better understanding of what we're going to be asked to, either approve or weigh in on?
Yeah. It's, yeah.
We can send out the MOU to everyone again and with the attachments, and then you can read through it.
It's really just the portion related to what we're all here for, which is the 55% regional allocation. I mean, I had an understanding that the state had their portion, the locals had their portion, and the foundation had its portion, with the recognition that there's some administrative costs to allocating money. I still am unclear as to what might be peeled off otherwise related to any statewide priorities, because the state got their portion as well. So I just want to get some clarity on that.
Just to clarify there's the 15% that goes to the state, but that's primarily used to pay the attorneys for the litigation. That's, in general, I don't anticipate that will be used for statewide programming. There is like a provision in there where a portion of a certain subset of the funds can divert to the foundation. We'll have to make that calculation at some point. So the foundation may have an additional amount that comes from the statewide funds. But in general, the 55% is not just for regional shares. It's regional shares, statewide programs and education, and then, operations of the board, investment of the board, whatever else you decide. But it's not, the MOU does not dictate that the full portion of the foundation, or that the foundation is set up simply as a pass-through to the regions.
I guess that begs the question, does the MOU dictate that the state receives a portion of the 55% for statewide programs?
The state is not receiving a portion. A portion of the dollars would be set aside to do statewide programming grants, just like regional
We're
grants.
dictated to do that.
Are we
The
dictating?
commissioner asked if we are dictated to do that, statewide programming through this.
That's a
foundation.
permissible use.
It's a
of the
permissible
funds,
use.
I think.
But we're not, it's not said that we must.
No.
May.
They also- What the language of the MOU says is funds for statewide programs, innovation, research, and education may also be expended by the foundation. And then it talks about the voting procedures. So if there's going to be any of that, it's going to be done through the foundation using some share of the 400, of the 55%.
Decided by this board.
I think we're confusing the language with statewide with the state of Ohio.
Yes.
It's not the state of Ohio that's going to get the money. It's,
Correct.
these are, monies that would benefit programs serving the entire state.
Correct.
Okay, that's a big source of confusion.
Yes.
15% is what goes to the state for the PEG measure.
The state of Ohio will get 15%, 30% to local government and municipalities, and 55% to the foundation.
Yeah, and I just,
Go ahead, Dwayne.
Since
so most of the grants will be driven from the regions. I mean, they'll submit to us. If we have the ability to have statewide, that's what I'm hearing. But that maybe we should take a step at a time. We should see what these regional grants look like, because there might be a trend we're seeing, and it's something we can combine together. So I think we need to, I would think, take a breath, see what the regions submit to us before. That's my thought. The other thought is, it may not be till June till we get the right person, but if that's the case and the money's here, maybe the finance director, the administrative assistant, the executive board kind of helps push some grants out. If the money's sitting here and we wait till June, we're gonna have people at this door. So I mean, we gotta get the right person, I get that, but we might have to set up an interim mechanism to distribute the first set of grants.
I agree. I don't think my region wants to wait till
You
June.
know,
Well,
we wanna get the right person. So we gotta.
But here's the main issue. There's no money to give
No,
out
we
right
don't.
now. So the regions have to be patient. There is no money.
No, I
At this
understand that,
point-
but say the money, just hypothetically, the money's here in May. And then it looks like we're not gonna get someone in place until July. At that time, we should probably make some
And we
decisions.
should,
But I understand, but once the money comes,
And
we
I
gotta have a
think
mechanism.
that's the message that you should be taking back to your regions. At this time, regional grant making cannot happen. We don't have policies, but more importantly, we don't have money.
That's
So we can give any money that we don't have. So at this point, it's very important that we are reiterating as board members back to our regions that the money has not come yet. And that we're still, as this board is still getting things done. We're putting policies in place. We're getting processes put in place. We are getting, the 1023, we're working
The next
through.
question is gonna be, what are you gonna do when the money gets here? You know, if we tell our people that the money's not there yet, the next question is not gonna be like, hey, what's your governance policy like? They don't care. They just wanna know about, when are you going to be in a position to help us? So,
As soon as
what
we're
would your advice be
As
to
soon as
them?
we're able, I mean, look, we can't arbitrarily set a date today that we're gonna be able to offer grants on this date, no matter what date you pick next year, right? We have certain things that we have to get done, and my message back to my region is we are doing our due diligence to get this set up for the long term, for a 20-year run, hopefully long, right? And the money, when it comes in, it'll come in, and when we're ready to send it out, we'll send it out. And we can't make up a date today because there's so much work that still needs to be done. So I've got a meeting with my region in 2 weeks, and that's the message I'm taking back to them. We're working our butts off here to try to get this thing set up for the long run. And as soon as we're able to get money out, we're gonna do that, but we can't give you a date today.
And regions need to do their due diligence as well. They need to get their bylaws in place and their grant making process in place. So while we are working on our end of it here, the region should be working on their end. Now, we have passed our code of regulations. Regions can take that back and adopt and format their own bylaws to either mirror or go with, or they could adopt the code of regulations and adapt them to their region. So there is work that the regions can be doing in preparation of the anticipated funds coming in.
I
Because we
question
can't-
though, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I question having the region start developing a grant making policy when they don't know what this board's policy is gonna be.
So their
So it's like a
policy
chicken
doesn't-
and an egg.
But their policy doesn't have to match ours. Many of the regions have already developed their bylaws.
Yeah, our region has too.
Yeah, and then there are some that we're waiting for the code of regulations to
But
pass.
we haven't developed a grant making process because we don't know what this board's policy is gonna be.
If I may, I think that's prudent, right? I'm not gonna
Yeah.
recommend to my region that they start their grant making process until they know what our grant making process looks like. So,
Exactly.
my suggestion to my group is gonna be start gathering all the contact information you can for everyone who might be interested down the road. So that the minute that we're ready to go through our regional grant making process, we've got a great list of people to send it out to, and that's the work that can be done right now.
I agree 100%.
Question, a different question. Is there a deadline for when local, governments or townships, for example, may opt in? There's some that have opted out, but may reconsider, to this whole process. Is there a deadline or a?
So, I am going to defer that question to CCAO. Rachel, is there a deadline for that, or is that already passed?
Are you talking about for the 30% bucket, or are you talking about?
Can't hear.
Both.
So, with respect to the settlements, my understanding from the attorneys is any entity that does not participate in either the distributor or the Johnson & Johnson settlement is able to participate at any time. They just will not be eligible retroactively for any back payments. With respect to your region, everybody did that differently, so I cannot answer that question. It's all like how people got sign off from the entities for their region stuff, that's all done differently, so it's really up to your region.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do have a follow-up for Rachel, if that's okay.
Sure.
So what happens with the township that don't participate, but percentage was set aside for them? Where those money go?
Yep, so my understanding from the attorneys is that it will remain with the defendants. If nobody claims it, it stays with the defendants. So if, if they are, okay, for the distributor settlement, it's 18 payments, right? Their chunk is broken into 18 payments. If none of their payments exceeds $500 in any of those 18, they're not all equal, there's fluctuation. If none of their payments equal 500, then their payments, instead of coming to them, go to the county in which the locality resides. So some of them know that, they have opted to not even go through the process because they're not going to get the money. Well, then the defendants keep that money. So
So-
this is the 30% bucket that
So
we're.
you still have to opt in, even if your payment is $200 for the county to get.
So that's the 30% bucket though, that's not, that doesn't affect like the foundation.
I understand, but I said it to Holly, those townships are still coming to us as regional, whatever, selected person. They come to me all the time with questions about the 30%. I keep explaining them, I'm with One Ohio Foundation, I'm not with your
Yeah,
30,
it's
but they
separate.
still come to me.
Yeah,
I mean, they said that they have no communication with nobody.
they should call the Ohio Township Association.
And
That's
I tell you,
who
my 8 counties, probably less than 5 townships in 8 counties participate. So I mean, I gotta get the message out there.
Yeah, they should, if they have questions, if they're a municipality, they should contact the Ohio Municipal League. If they're township, they should contact the Ohio Township Association. And if you're a county, well, all your signed on, so. But yeah, that would be my advice to them, because they've been getting the same information that I've been getting from the plaintiff's executive committee attorneys, and they know.
Madam Chair, would you accept the motion to adjourn?
He withdrew.
Before we do, they checked and we did not approve the executive firm's expenditure. So I do make a motion to approve 150,000 for the duration of the executive firm.
I second that motion. Any discussion? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Now, will you accept my motion to adjourn?
I will. We are adjourned. Thank you.